Welcome to Weasel Gaming, and today we're going to look at the tactics for the Drednaw theme deck. This is the Sword and Shield Vivid Voltage Drednaw deck. And we'll go ahead and we'll dig right into what's in the deck, how you want to play it, how to make the best use out of this. Now this is a water-based deck, uniquely water-based deck here. Total focus, 18 water. There are no other types, not even colorless Pokemon in here. This is all water all the time. Jump right into the Pokemon. First one we're going to talk about is your starters, and you really only have one option here, and that's Wishy-Washy. Very low health at 30 health, but does have Deep Sea Swirl, which is extremely useful. Deep Sea Swirl allows you to shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 8 cards. This is great early on. You can play the cards out of your hand that you want to play, shuffle everything back into the deck, and get 8 new cards, which is a rather large hand. So it's pretty useful early on to really cycle the deck, pull out the cards you really need to play right now, and get them on the board. Other than that, your only other option for starters is Arrokuda and Barraskewda. Arrokuda himself is not very good. 60 health, Flock attack is really more useful later on. 2 energy peck is only 20 damage. That's not going to last very long as a starter. Barraskewda is better. 120 health, 2 energy jet headbutt for 60 damage. Bonus there is targeted skewer can do some damage to people that are on the bench if they already have damage. So if they put someone out but then pulled them back because you're doing damage, then that targeted skewer can still come in handy. But Barraskewda tends to play better later, as does Arrokuda. So that's not a great way to start off your game. Wishy-Washy is really the only starter. And that's really one of the weaknesses of this deck. About the only weakness of this deck, really, is it doesn't have much to start with. And it makes it hard because you really have to pull a lot of cards to get anything else going. Now for defense, really about the only things we have here is the Oshawott, Duat, Samurott line. Duat has a little bit of manipulation and defense in the fact that it has Aqua Wash. 3 energy attack for 50 damage, and you may put an energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon back in their hand. That has some limited use. Duat's only got 90 health. Ocelott's a really bad starter to use on anything. Aqua Wash, they can just put that energy right back on that Pokemon, so it's hard to really do much with that. However, Samurott is very powerful. 160 health is a lot of health. The shell armor has 30 defense, so you're going to lower the attack damage against your Pokemon by 30, which is pretty powerful. On top of that, Aqua Wash works as kind of a low-key defensive ability also, because you may put 2 energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon back into their hand. Now in most cases, a person's only going to be able to put 1 of those energy back on. So if you play this against a Pokemon like Rillaboom that has 3 energy out there, you reduce it by 2, they only have 1 and they can only put 1 more back on. Now they're not going to be able to use that ability because they need 3 for that base ability. So that's where Samurott really comes in handy with reducing the opponent's ability to even respond to you. It's very important to play Samurott at the right times, pull him back from the active slot when you need to, deploy him when you need to. That's really your most tactical and most useful Pokemon you have. The 120 damage is kind of on the weak side, but that's a lot of ability added to that. Now we're going to talk power. And that's where this deck really kind of shines too. First up, we have the Choodle line to get to our mascot of the deck, Drednaw. Drednaw's only got 140 health, which is a little lower than I'd like to see. The Vice Wave is a 3 energy, 80 damage attack. And if you happen to have played Nessa the same round, then you actually can paralyze the opponent's active Pokemon. This is an extremely tactical situation. So if you have a target that has over 140 health, you can do a Vice Wave attack with Nessa, paralyze them, do that 80 damage, then you can hit them next round with 140 damage Surf. That gives you a total of 220 damage, which is more than enough to knock out anything in theme deck play. So Drednaw can be very powerful if played right, if coupled with Nessa. The 4 energy Surf attack for 140 damage isn't bad. That's going to knock out a lot of things, and Drednaw can just be your typical kind of bruiser there. Next up is, of course, going back to one that we've already talked about, and that's our Oshawott line that culminates with Samurott. Again, 160 health is good. The shell armor is going to keep them in the game for a long time. And Aqua Wash, which does 120 damage, is not really high damage, but when you couple it with the fact that you're going to be removing a lot of energy off your opponent, means they're not going to be able to respond to you and do damage back. So that makes it more powerful. So Samurott becomes a very effective Pokemon at being able to do damage and stay in the game for a long time. Last up, you have the Arrokuda Cramorant combo. And this is kind of an oddball one. Arrokuda, of course, doesn't do any damage. Cramorant, who has 110 health, only has one attack. It's a 2 energy attack called Continuous Gulp Missile, which does 60 times the amount of Arrokudas that you discard from your bench. This makes it a tricky card to play. That means you're going to be able to, if you have Arrokudas on your bench, in this deck, be able to do either 60 damage, 120 damage, or 180 damage, making it actually your heaviest hit out there. When you combine this with a couple cards, you get some interesting plays. If you have Cramorant on your deck with 2 energy, you can play Sonia to pull a couple Arrokudas out of your deck and get them on your bench. That allows Cramorant to do his attack. After you've already spent those Arrokudas and they're in the discard pile, you can use Nessa to pull them back out of your discard pile and get them back onto your bench so Cramorant can do an attack again. You have 3 Nessas, so you can actually recycle Cramorant's attack a couple times. Arrokuda also can be used just with the flock ability to attract a couple others out of the deck initially. In case you have one Arrokuda, you know he's not going to get knocked out, or even if you're willing to risk him, you don't have to use Sonia that way. Now, if you use Nessa to pull those Arrokudas back, you got to keep in mind you're not going to have Nessa for Drednaw's paralyzing attack. So you got to keep that in mind. There's a lot of tactical decisions there. Cramorant has some limited functionality here, though. And this kind of goes for everything in your deck. It takes a lot of pieces to be in play at the same time. For Cramorant to do the 180 damage, you have to have 3 slots on your bench dedicated to Arrokuda and Cramorant in your active spot. That's 4 out of your 6 spots dedicated to this attack, which means you don't have much room to be building anything else on your deck. Cramorant's fairly weak at 110 health, and once you run out of Nessas and Sonias and stuff to play to keep those Arrokudas out there, you have 2 energy devoted to someone that can't do anything else. So if you don't have any Nessas in your hand, or only 1, Cramorant's a pretty limited attack, and it takes a lot of cards to get into play. So there's no one that's really a gigantic heavy hitter, and all of your combos take a lot of work to set up. Choodle and Drednaw, you got the 2 Pokemon, 4 energy to really power them up, and to really make the most out of Drednaw against high health enemies, you need Nessas that you can play also. For the Oshawott, Dewott, Samurott, you need all 3 of that line, plus the energy to play them. For Cramorant and Arrokuda, you need up to 4 cards out of your 6 devoted to this attack, and you probably need Sonias and or Nessas to really get the most out of this. And that makes all of these difficult combinations to get into play. The Samurott is obviously one of the easier ones because it doesn't necessarily depend on other cards to really get going. But all of your power players need, a good 5, 6, 7 cards to really fall into place and be useful. So you do have to be careful with getting things aligned, and that again is the weakness of this deck. All theme decks are really draw dependent on getting the right cards at the right time. This deck is even more so. This one lives or dies by the fact of you having or not having the right combination of cards. I've had some games where I've had all 3 Drednaws in my hand, but I don't have any Choodles or way to get Choodles. And I just have a dead hand then. I'm not getting anywhere in the game. You might have Duwats and Samurats, but if you don't have Ocelot, you can't start building to it. You might have Cramorant and an Aracuda, but no way to get the other ones in play, or once you do, no way to get them back out of the discard to play again. Then you just have 2 energy devoted to a Pokemon that can't do anything. The other issue with this deck is it's one type, all water, and everyone in the deck has the same weaknesses to electric. You're of course going to be strong against fire decks. So the Charizard deck that's coming out, that we'll be hearing about more later, probably next week. And then, the Relentless Flame, the last Charizard deck from Sun and Moon. Also powerful against Cinderace. So against all of those, it's got a type advantage, but again, you got to be drawing the cards, otherwise you got nothing to play. You are totally weak to electric. Now, right now, that doesn't matter. There isn't a lot of strong electric stuff out there. There's a couple decks you see once in a while that have some electric that can be a bother to you. But electric is not very common right now. There are a lot of theme decks right now that are weak to electric. And we don't have a strong electric theme deck. So I really feel like in the next set that's going to be coming out, or the one after that, I think we're going to see at least an electric deck in there that really kind of turns into that, because there's a lot of electric weakness out there that's not being exploited. So on to our support cards. First off, we want to look at our draws. And this deck has a fair amount of draws. We have 4 Hops and 2 Dans, which are straight up great draw cards. Hop draws 3, Dan draws 2, and allows you to play rock, paper, scissors for another 2. So those are pretty solid, and like I said, 4 Hops, 2 Dans, it's a lot of draws. You also have Professor's Research, which is kind of difficult in this deck. In some decks, Professor's Research is pretty good. This deck isn't one of them. I find in this deck you tend to be a little card heavy in your hand because you have stuff that you're waiting to build later. Keep in mind that all your power stuff takes 5, 6, 7 cards. So chances are you're carrying some of that in your hand, and using Professor's Research to throw it away ends up hurting you. So Professor's Research is really more of a opportunistic or desperation move. For pulling Pokemon, you have 2 Great Balls. You have 2 Sonias. Now usually I'm of the sort that wants to hold Sonia for pulling energy. Energy is really a big concern. This deck only has 18 water energy. However, nothing in this deck is really highly energy dependent. Nothing throws water energy away. Your attackers only use 2, 3, maybe 4 energy when you're looking at Drednaw. Samurot's only 3 energy, Cramorant's only 2 energy. So they're fairly energy efficient, and I never seem to have a problem with energy. So Sonia is really better for getting those cards onto your bench, making sure that you have a Choodle, making sure you have an Ocelot, pulling those Aracudas if you're going to use Cramorant. That's what Sonia is really good for in this deck. Nessa is also pretty good. Again, a lot of times I would be using someone that can pull energy from discard to pull energy from discard, and Nessa can do that. But Nessa can also pull Pokemon from discard. That's really going to come in handy with keeping Aracudas on the bench so that your Cramorant can take attacks. or pulling some kind of essential upgrade like a Samurott or Drednaw so that you can finish evolving other family lines that you have on your bench. So Nessa is really best used to pull Pokemon back out, and then if you can fill that slot with some energy if you need to. You also have, and you have 3 of those Nessas. You also have 1 Evolution Incense. Evolution Incense allows you to search your deck for an evolution Pokemon, reveal it, and put it in your hand. Now, that's a great way to finish off your Ocelot, Duat, Samurott, or your Choodle, Drednaw lines if you need to. I've also, another good time it would be used is to fish out your Barraskewda. You only have 1 Barraskewda in the deck. And Barraskewda can be used as a very powerful way to finish off people that are injured and on the bench. A lot of times players will pull wounded Pokemon back just so they don't give you a prize card. Barraskewda can snipe those out in the back. Now, for energy manipulation, you of course have Sonia if you need to pull energy from your deck. You have Nessa to pull energy from your discard. And you do have 2 beads you can use to put extra energy on. So again, besides the fact that you don't use a lot of energy, you have a lot of ways to play and pull energy back from the deck, from discard, play it from your hand. So it's a fairly energy efficient deck. Now for other oddball cards, really the only other thing we have here is 2 switches. These switches don't have any huge tactical use. There's no situation where you need to be pulling something back and putting something forward. The few examples when that would be handy is pulling a Samurott back before you know he's going to get knocked out so that you can deploy him later to pull energy away from a Pokemon and hinder that Pokemon and beat him up slowly. Or to switch an Arrokuda with your Cramorant, but Arrokuda only has a 1 energy attack anyways. Still can be useful. So Switch doesn't have a lot of tactical use, but those are a few cases where it comes in handy. Otherwise, your typical ways of saving Pokemon so they don't get knocked out, things like that. You don't have any heals, and other than Duat and Samurott, you don't have a lot of control in your deck. However, Duat and Samurott are very powerful control cards. The way that they can remove energy from your opponent's Pokemon stalls their way of advancing Pokemon, and in Samurott's case, removing 2 energy can actually take away their ability to even return attacks against you. So that's pretty important and powerful. So now it's time to look at our stats. For power, we're only sitting at a 3. We don't have any real heavy hitters other than Cramorant. This deck revolves more around kind of control. And along those control lines, I guess I should have mentioned also, you do have the Nessa Drednaw combo to paralyze your opponent too. So there's not a lot of heavy hitters. You're more of a control tactical deck kind of situation. Speed is how fast you can get your Pokemon on the deck and hitting. Now with the low energy cost, you would think this number would be higher, but we're only sitting at a 2, and that's because it is really hard to get these combinations rolling. You have to get your evolutions out there. You have to get them, powered up with energy, and a lot of them need support. Either Nessas or Sonias or whatnot, to really be effective. So that's why our speed is only a 2. Agility is how well can we get Pokemon on the bench. And again, this is kind of a problem for this deck. Sure, we have Sonias, we have Nessas to pull them back from discard or whatnot, but if you don't have the right cards at the right time, you can often be sitting with a deck full of very weak Pokemon that don't have anything they can do. So in this case, our agility is sitting at a 2. Energy efficiency, however, is a 3. It's a fairly energy efficient deck. Everything needs a little bit of energy to get going, but there is a fair bit of energy out there. You're not throwing it away. You have some ways to retrieve it, so it's fairly energy efficient. This is a relatively complex deck. It's not super complex, but the weird combinations of Cramorant and Arrokuda, Nessa and Drednaw, Nessa, Sonia, and Cramorant, all those different combos really make it so you do have to plan ahead. It's very easy to be in a situation where you want to use Cramorant, but you don't have enough space left on your bench. So you're not able to get those big punches out of him to do big damage. Resiliency is a 3. And this comes down to a couple things. One is your Drednaw. Fair health, but the ability to stun with that paralyze attack is pretty powerful and can keep your Pokemon in play without getting damaged. Samurot's got 160 health and has that shell armor and the energy reduction. So again, that's pretty important there. Really makes you a fairly resilient fighter. You can take a lot of hits. You can reduce their energy to reduce the amount of attacks they can do. It's pretty powerful. Type ability sitting at a 1. You're all water. You have all of the same weaknesses. You're strong against one type of deck. You have no flexibility there. So type ability is sitting at a 1. Manipulation is a 3, and we've already talked about this when it comes back to resiliency. The manipulation is sitting there with, again, Drednaw and Nessa, and the Samurott energy reduction and shell armor, well, not the shell armor in this case, but that energy reduction. You can really force your opponents to play certain cards or to sacrifice certain things to you to avoid those kind of abilities. You can really make good use of that. So that's why manipulation is sitting at a 3. All in all, I was kind of surprised by this deck. On the surface, it seems like a great deck. I was really impressed with it. It seemed like it had some fun gameplay ability, and it really does. It can be a very interesting, fairly flexible deck. However, the card dependency is kind of the nail in the coffin for this one and keeps it from being a truly amazing deck. That problem is the fact that, to play Drednaw really effectively, you need to have Nessa. And you need to be willing to play Nessa. And if you play Nessa for Drednaw, you don't have Nessa for Cramorant. Or if you're playing Nessa for Cramorant to keep those Arrokudas in play, then you don't have Nessas later for your Drednaw. Same thing with, getting Samurott up to power. You got to get through 2 evolutionary phases. You got to get the energy out there. Then you got to keep them alive and keep them in the play, which might mean switching them out and switching them back in. So often you're just dependent on all those cards, and Cramorant and all the Arrokudas and all the space you need on the bench. It becomes just a difficult kind of juggling act where you need all of these right cards all at the right time. And even if you get one put together, let's say you get Drednaw and you have a couple Nessas, once you finally lose Drednaw, if you haven't built up either a backup Drednaw or a Samurott, you're going to be stuck because you're going to run out of that one great card you've spent 5-6 turns building, and you got nothing to back it up now because it takes another 5-6 turns to build something else. So this is a great deck if you pull all the right cards at the right time. However, it's very card dependent, and there aren't a lot of different paths you can take. So if you don't pull the right cards, you can be left just stuck with nothing to back you up. So this deck is either, really shines or just really falls apart. And it often happens really early on. Those first couple draws are great and you got a good smooth ride, or those first couple draws are bad and you're just stuck holding a hand of dud cards that you really can't make use of. So as far as water deck, it's a fun one to play. It's a good one if the cards fall in your favor, but I kind of prefer some other decks to this one right now. Hopefully you've learned a little bit more about this deck, how you can improve your play. I hope you check back for more videos in the future, and thanks for watching.